On behalf of the Churchill Club, it's my pleasure to introduce Riva Richmond, a freelance journalist who writes for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Riva got her start in journalism while living in Cairo, but her first tech assignment was covering stock chat sites during the end of the tech stock bubble at Dow Jones Newswire. This is how she started looking at the internet dark side. People would spread false rumors online and profit from them in pump and dump schemes. After the bust, she began covering the big virus outbreaks that were then happening on a regular basis, such as the I Love You virus, Code Red, and other major outbreaks, and the public security software makers. After that, she was moved to the Internet beat, covering Google, Yahoo, eBay, and Amazon, among others, also covering fraud whenever she could. She's certainly well-positioned to lead a great conversation tonight. Please give a warm Churchill Club welcome to Riva Richmond.
Hi, everyone. So our panel tonight is on securing the enterprise, and I think we all know the innovation pace has just been sort of amazing for the last few years. Our networks have more and more valuable data on them. They're more and more complex. The attacks are getting more and more sophisticated, so it's an increasingly difficult task to secure the enterprise. And so that's our backdrop tonight. So I wanted to start with just a broad question to anyone who would like to jump in of just what do you see as sort of the number one threat facing the enterprise right now? And how is that really different from, say, 2 years ago or 5 years ago? You know, if you can give us a sense of how things have shifted.
Well, I'll start, if that's okay. First of all, I'm Dan Glessner with Trend Micro. We have been in business for about 22 years as a company focused on anti-malware. I see the biggest challenge for enterprises for security is dealing with this malware, which has changed significantly over the last few years. I think the general public doesn't understand the magnitude of it. It is huge. It's a huge problem. It's a huge challenge. Enterprises with hundreds of people spending all day working on security are tremendously challenged. And the biggest change has been the acceleration in the volume of malware. You know, this is almost laughable, but 15 plus years ago when we started, we used to deliver floppy disks in the mail to protect our customers. Nowadays, one new piece of malware or threat is getting created every second. So trying to deal with the volume problem, and then the other big shift that we've seen is over the last few years, people are writing malware to make money. It's pure and simple. And this is organized crime on a huge international scale. So trying to deal with that and deal with like targeted attacks on enterprises, it's very challenging.
This is Adrian Turner, and CEO with Mocana. We're focused on securing all of these non-PC devices that are connecting to networks. So it's handsets, but it's printers, video conferencing equipment, voice over IP gear, it's all of it. And I think there's really two major trends that is disruptive to the enterprise in the context of security. One is the proliferation of all of these devices and the consumerization of the internet, people bringing their iPhones into the enterprise. And the second one is this shift to the cloud. So leveraging kind of the cloud to store assets, valuable assets.
I think we talked about it being a threat, but I do think that it's also the problem that the enterprise is facing. As Adrian rightfully pointed out, the consumerization, right? The fact that there's not an employer that's being asked by their employees to let me use a different device, let me use an unsanctioned application or technology that typically the IT organization had complete control over. Today, IT organizations don't have control over the devices that I'm using, And for a large part, even the applications that I might need to use. It might be just a web browser. It might be a web-based application that really drives individual and company productivity. So the threat is for enterprises that really don't understand what they have to do to maintain that level of productivity and secure it properly.
Yeah, at Sybase, we see exactly the same thing, right? We provide infrastructure, software infrastructure to manage on mobile devices in all sorts. But this phenomenon that we're talking about, consumerization of IT, if you look outside of the US, a lot of people actually have been owning their own devices, going into the enterprise in some form. But yet now, because of the US, having this iPhone phenomenon, we're seeing as a big, big issue. But in some ways, it's been going on in some form. But yet this data that's on the device, that is the leakage of corporate information that is out there. And I think that, from a threat perspective, we are now waking up to this phenomenon. But from a global corporation perspective, that has been there for quite some time. And what are we doing about it?
So, and the source of that problem, is it the device, the personal device that the employee brings into the network? And to what degree is it the devices that companies are issuing to their employees now so that they can do business while they're on the road?
Or devices that they didn't issue to.
That's right.
So I think picking sort of the top threat is almost like asking a golfer what's your favorite golf course, right? You could maybe narrow it down to your top 5 or 6. But I would tell you that all the threats that existed in 2009 still exist in 2010 and will probably still exist in 2011. But what I'm concerned about is the way that we deal with some of the threats, and that we make security's tough. And we were talking earlier, and it's almost as though the security industry is writing products for only itself to use. They're not. Security is not user-friendly at all, almost not at all. And even when we try to make it user-friendly, we somehow find a way to mess it up. But maybe the biggest threat that we have going into 2011 is that we haven't found a way to make it convenient, to make security second nature and convenient for people to use. I think that people aren't using good security products that are out there today. And many companies are making real high quality products, and many of them are represented here today. They're just not entirely convenient for the average person to use. So what they do is they skip it or they bypass it. And the worst thing that you can do with consumer devices like iPhones or other devices that you didn't issue as a company, but that someone goes out and buys and then connects it to your network, you can't fight that. It's like fighting gravity. You really can't do it. And so what you wind up having to do is rethink what you want to do. And many companies are accepting some level of risk instead of saying, I know that this is all going to happen. What can I do to prevent it from becoming a catastrophe? Just accept that it's going to happen because you can't stop it. As soon as the CEO gets an iPhone, everybody's going to get one. Okay? So, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, I think when we say consumerization of IT, the usability, the individual usability outside of corporate data, we see it from a philosophy perspective. We actually say that you should preserve that usability. And then we were talking earlier where if I'm using an iPhone and I want to change a song, do I really need to enter a 4-pin password to change a song? That's not what that device is meant for, right? When I'm jogging, do I really want to go and do a 4-pin password and then change a song in that sense, right? So it really comes down to how do you actually preserve that personal use flavor and then allow the corporate data to be the only thing that really gets locked down from encryption, from password, from synchronization, all of that, so that you don't impede on the individual use, right, in that nature. In the past, devices have come with dual boot, and I think that was a non-starter right off the bat, right? Now we have different ways to solve that problem.
I mean, part of what we're talking about, though, is how much should we be relying on people to have to make conscious decisions? And if you look at all the devices in an enterprise, we've talked about, handsets, the other natural ones, laptops, PCs, but there are a lot of other things, like printers. Printers is one of the primary access points into a corporate network. You don't think of it as a PC, but it is. It's a Linux-based device. It's got a hard disk. It's got network connectivity. But people supplying to the enterprise, not just software vendors, not just security software vendors, But even the device guys, Apple has a responsibility, Nokia has a responsibility, HP has a responsibility to bake in security capabilities into these devices that get delivered to the enterprise, as opposed to relying on stuff post-manufacture only and requiring the user to do a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes securing the device too tightly, I think, encourages. I agree with everything you said, by the way. Printers is a very highly overlooked threat in the environment. But let's take the iPhone for an example. Very cool device, but the only way that you could get an application on it was that you had to go through the App Store to get it. And this frustrated a lot of people, so it encouraged a lot of people to try to figure out just how to bypass that security mechanism. And enough people worked on it, and it was a serious enough issue to them that they focused a lot of attention on it. And now anybody who wants to jailbreak their iPhone can, and they've made it that easy to compromise the security system of that phone.
Okay, well, but to what degree are these really ways that attackers are getting into the corporate network? I mean, what is the industry is a bit famous for sort of fear, uncertainty, doubt kind of marketing approach. And so I'd be really interested to hear, the degree to which you think, you can sort of maybe provide some examples of how it's actually happening and what, has been taken and the sort of, the real costs of that. Ponyman had a study recently on their data breach study that I think the average loss for a company that has a data breach is $6 to $7 million. The company that had the worst situation, $31 million cost to them. So, I mean, there are real stakes, but how are they getting in? How is it actually happening?
Single biggest threat that exists in any enterprise is between the keyboard and the back of the chair. It's the user that's gone someplace or done something unknowingly that has caused this to happen. That's probably the number one way. And by the way, they have full access to the network. So once they drag it onto their machine, it's behind the firewall already. But I will say, so we used printers as an example. These printers are computers, and no one ever thinks about protecting those printers. And people that has been, I would say, within the top 5 ways people are getting in is on these network-connected printers that have access to the outside.
Let me see if I can take it a different direction, though. I don't want to prescribe that it's only up to the user. I think the industry has to do a far better job, and certainly it's a challenge that we face every day. But back to your specific question, how are things getting in the network? I mean, so I've got this application. Every company is using social media today as a way to communicate. And all of a sudden, you're finding out that people are tagging Facebook sites, right? So the pure application of Facebook that I want to go drive some level of commercialization, some level of awareness, also now becomes the application that might be creating the massive pervasion of botnets into my system. How? Somebody just tagged my Facebook. Somebody tagged me with a WAV file with some sort of data point that's now distributing at a higher level these botnets throughout my network. And now as a user, did I do anything wrong? I did everything right. I'm trying to create productivity for my company. So I think we as the industry have to, again, educate, have to do a much better job of making sure that we're building, quite frankly, sophisticated technology that does not limit scanning capability. I still am surprised at how many devices we call secure that aren't perfectly scanning every packet, every protocol, every port. We the security industry, allow, quite frankly, exceptions. And we've got to move above that because users can't be, especially users that we're expecting to be productive through these applications, can't be challenged over every time. What am I doing and how secure am I when I'm doing it?
Well, I think the other area is also this whole aspect of this firewall that we have all been trained to say we've got to open up a port in the firewall to get a partner to actually be able to talk to me. And so all of a sudden you start opening up these holes all over the place and say, how do I control all the ports? And now there's enough technology out there to say you actually can change the game and say, let it be a reverse proxy and actually me going out, just like me going out to Google. I don't need to have a port for Google to come into my enterprise for me to reach out to Google. So if you take that concept and turn the whole problem around, then you have less of this issue of people coming through those ports in a malware way or any way we're talking about. But you still have this issue of the end user sitting in a chair doing that, right? So that becomes a problem.
Just
Yeah,
add, please. It's really people, process, and technology. You know, it's easy to just, oh, stupid end user. You know, they clicked on Britney Spears pictures. You know, that's not always the case. And nowadays, they don't, as Matt said, they don't have to click on anything. They just go. They could go to CNN.com that might have malware on that website, and they'll get infected. But so it's people, process, technology. It's very complex. But I'll go back to the question that Riva asked and try to give a real-world example. And I'm going to tell a story that is of a data breach that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And maybe Riva will remember it, but it's TJX or TJ Maxx Corporation from a couple of years ago. So this is often the situation. You know, when you think of an enterprise with thousands of people, how many hundreds of applications, how many different versions, different devices, start doing the multiplication, very complex. They had a situation where a Microsoft vulnerability, they weren't able to patch like all of their systems. And the vulnerability from Microsoft was like announced. Microsoft came up with a patch, I forget the exact date. They just couldn't get to it because it's very challenging to try to patch all the systems, et cetera. The aftermath of this story is malware got onto their network, like I think it was in October of '07. They did not discover the breach until May of 2008. The malware that got onto their network stole 90 million customer records or credit cards. I don't remember the specifics.
Credit cards.
Yeah, and they ended up their income statement. It hit their bottom line, to say nothing of the brand reputation, their market cap. So this, you know, that was hundreds of millions of dollars. Now that was a visible case. I don't know if people read recently, but JCPenney was, well, and actually, let me finish the story. There's good news here. The guy that wrote that malware got caught, and he got a 20-year prison sentence, which was the highest sentence. So, I mean, that's wonderful. It was just like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. I saw a couple of days ago, that same guy, who was an ex-government employee, by the way, he also got JCPenney. But JCPenney for years did not want that information to go public. So it's kind of this asymmetrical economic incentive that works to the bad guy's advantage, where you have companies that they don't want to go to the FBI and tell them that they've been breached. And it's just working to the bad guy's advantage because the good guys, private sector as well as public sector working together have a hard time connecting all the dots because there's this economic incentive. Companies don't want to share that, hi, I've been breached.
Well, DJX said the same mistake twice.
So it's a very complex thing, but it's huge magnitude. And I have a feeling it's happening much more than we all know.
Yeah. Well, but there are legal requirements to disclose when it's personal information of consumers. But we also know, with the case of Google recently, and 20, 30 odd other companies, that intellectual property and trade secrets can be the target as well. And usually, companies won't talk about that. And from your all experience, I mean, how what are the most precious targets, I guess?
So Riva, I think also for all of us to remember, listen, there are a lot of attacks that are going on that no one knows what they have taken. These people are operating in stealth mode. And so I think, to be very clear, I think it's very fair to say companies are deploying excellent security processes today, and unfortunately things are still happening in their network. But back to what your point was about Google and the attacks that have been recently happening on let's say, non-personal credit card or some sort of economic issue, more into the intellectual property and such. Again, I would suggest that a lot of those attacks are going on, but they're in stealth mode. People don't even know that they're happening.
Adrian, you want to jump in?
I mean, the other thing too is we talk about motives for attacks. So yeah, there's commercial, but there's also an increase in state-sponsored attacks. So it wasn't so long ago that there was a joint striker Air Force project that was hundreds of billions of dollars that had to get canned because the intellectual property was compromised.
What's very interesting about the Google attacks in China is that the CISO of Google went public, or else we'd not know about it. It would just be one of the things that's happening all the time.
Well, I'm not so sure that we wouldn't have known about it. Google was one of many companies that was affected by that, so it would have come out one way or another, I think. But I actually am very worried about the data theft, but I'm more worried about a penetration which causes subtle changes to data and doesn't steal anything, but just makes changes to the data that you may not know have happened for months or years. Yes. You know, changes to databases, changes to financial records, changes to source code, these kinds of things that we've been, frankly, somewhat lucky in that what we have found has been gross enough that we've been able to see what has actually happened. But the things that have been, imagine if these worms that got loose, all these botnets, if they were destroying data on your machine as opposed to just launching denial of service attacks and running phishing sites. Imagine if they were subtly, not deleting all the files, just a few files. And if you have 1,000 files on your machine, how long is it going to take you to notice that your tax records from last year are gone until you need them for this year?
So what's the answer then for companies? What do they need to do differently so that they're detecting an attack or an infiltration of their network quickly and are sort of able to recover from it more quickly, which would presumably cost them less money?
I think the most important thing that I could recommend to all companies, scan your 100% of your data. And that's not happening today. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the majority of companies today don't scan 100% of their data. It's the file's too large. My security system doesn't do this protocol. It's just too complex to do it at every remote site that I have. Therefore, I'm going to do it where it's most important. Usually that's at corporate headquarters, right? Well, it's too late. It's too late. There is no perimeter to a network any longer, right? And I think the important thing is that people have to realize that, especially as we start to see 100 gig types of topologies being commonplace in any business, the massive amount of data that people are going to be able to extract quickly and seamlessly is going to be ever present. So scan 100% of the data, 100% of the data. There should be no exception.
How much of the answer is encrypting the data? I mean, then if they get the data, they can't do anything with it, right?
Well, you know, and again, there's sophisticated ways around encryption, right? So I think it's a constant battle of encryption. It's not just encrypt once, right? It is just continual encryption and continual scanning.
Yeah, right? And I think you know, some key components of some operating systems have been encrypted, and then people have found ways of getting around that by just tricking the software into believing that you're the intended recipient. Another problem with encryption is that it can tend to slow the system down a bit. Yep. And you know, it's funny, we were talking about earlier about green technologies and things that you can do. I can tell you that most companies, technologies, will choose performance over energy savings whenever they can, because they always shoot for the highest performance. And if something's going to get on your system that is potentially going to lower the performance of the system, people tend to resist it. It's not always the right thing to do, but I completely agree with Matt that data integrity checking is absolutely key to everything, particularly key data. You know, the databases that hold your employee records, that hold your financial records, et cetera, that kind of data integrity checking is absolutely vital for companies. Now, do you necessarily need to check every word processing file? You would hope that you can, and the technology's out there that would allow this to happen today. But people just don't do it. It's a complicated process, very complicated.
I think a complementary thing that could be done is also talk about all the devices that may not be connected to the network at all times and not necessarily on premise. There's also this aspect of what we call data fading, or if it's not connected for a while, that I could set a policy as like that device, the data on that device, that's corporate data, I could actually wipe that out without it ever connected back to the enterprise. And so because if you lost your laptop, if you lost your iPhone or anything else, and there's corporate data in there, I could just pull the SIM out and not have any 3G connection or Wi-Fi connection. I could go ahead and work on that device without you ever knowing, right? And so that data fading thing really is sort of like the last mile, right? In terms of really security, you really want to wipe it out without you ever actually administratively wiping it out. It's just a policy setting you could put in.
I think just the other suggestions for what companies have to try to do to stay ahead, and I think there's some analogies in the physical world just around health. And like number one is, every once in a while, go to a doctor, get a checkup. So that means do a vulnerability assessment, scan, do penetration testing for your environment. This is business basic.
So hire hackers essentially to come and try to hack you.
Large financial services firms in New York, this is standard all the time. But that's okay, get a checkup, go to a doctor. The other thing is educate yourself. What's good? What should you be eating, Big Mac every day? Or so education of employees is very important. Because if this is viewed as, oh, this is some kind of IT problem, then a company will fail. They have to try to infuse this security mentality into it's everybody's issue, and I know that's very hard. But so there's education aspect, and then there's like the physical exercise, eat better. And I'd put that in the category of protect yourself. Take, as Matt was saying, scan or make sure you're using, security products, make sure it's updating, make sure you're patching vulnerabilities. This is much easier said than done. But that's what they have to do.
Well, I think those are all very good things to do, and everyone, I think that's best practice to do those sorts of things. But a lot of the threats today are less about a cancer or a disease than they are about a sniper, shooting you in the head when you walk out the door. This zero-day malware is something that there's no signature for, there's no fingerprint for, and it is getting through the best firewalls on the market. It is getting through the best intrusion detection systems on the market. It's even slipping through the best data leak protection systems in the world, and that is what I think is probably the single biggest problem that we have, is that you can't even see what it's going to be tomorrow. You can't even see what the threat's going to be tomorrow.
So that's the whole. Go ahead, Adrian.
I was going to say, so you're right. It's a fundamental philosophical shift from let's try and detect rogue behavior. Let's create virus definitions and signatures and detect what's bad, to let's enforce correct behavior. And it's really, really hard to do. And there are a lot of companies that have tried unsuccessfully at different levels in the software stack to solve that. But fundamentally, if you look at security, even if you look at how the industry grew up, right, over the last 15 years, it's been an arms race. So it's been in response to a threat, there's a product created. It's versus, we do a lot of work in the federal sector. I mean, in parts of different industries, there's serious discussion about do we need to start all over again, and deal with security at level zero. Ground zero is a bad term, but level zero. Do we need to start all over again with a philosophy of enforcing correct behavior?
Well, that or if people come to work to actually work. I mean, a lot of
as opposed to
a lot of this stuff isn't on.
So aggressive web filtering, that's the answer?
Well, it's not.
Don't let them use Facebook.
A lot of this malware isn't on actual work-related sites. Okay, some of it is, but it's a small percentage of it, and it's the recreational activities that's luring some of it into the environment.
Absolutely right, Ken. But I think you'd agree with me, though, that
that cat's
exactly. It's already left the station. But just as importantly, I think for all of us to believe that we're going to have this pure world, don't let anybody do any personal work on a computer or server that my company owns. I guarantee you my company's productivity will go down. We work 24/7, full stop. We, the industry security, have to find a way to deal with that phenomena. And I think it's our responsibility to get there.
And
I agree with you. I agree with you that it would be a whole lot simpler if it was contained to the old, to yesterday's business apps, CRM, ERP situations, right? A set of desktop apps, it'd be a whole lot simpler for us to fight that battle.
Yeah, but you ought to look at the logs. Some of these web logs, I mean, it will blow your mind how much time is spent.
It's wasted. Well, so it's the web log, it's the bandwidth consumption. We can go back all through the level of investment that's being made for non-productive apps. And all of those do have a chance to get there. But, I mean, and again, it isn't just the hacker from outside. We also see security breaches happening from the inside too, right? And so I think, again, we can't forget that it's a problem that's got to be managed in a very dynamic way.
So it sounds like you're saying that really the focus has to be around the data more than, well, because there is no perimeter anymore.
Right,
So,
and that data is getting consumerized, as we said before. I mean, it would have been nice if we just had a set of canned apps that we ran our business and could have control of the data in motion and the data in rest. Those days are over. We're all competing in a market today that I want to be on every possible view of commerce that I possibly can be. Don't limit me. That's exactly what our sales team, our marketing team, and quite frankly, as a CEO of SonicWALL, that's what I'm saying, right? At the same time, I inherit risk by doing that. Now, I've got to put the protections in place to make sure that those risks are minimal and don't outweigh the opportunities.
But it does raise a question, who's responsible? So the concept of, corporate liable versus employee liable. Like if I bring something into who's responsible?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. But interestingly enough, it seems as though that there's this new shift in the security industry not to, it's almost, there's this feeling, and I'm not saying it's actually happened, but there's almost this sense we've given up. It's going to get in. Now let's focus on products that once it gets in, how do we minimize the damage that it does? And it seems, at the RSA conference this year, there was a lot of talk about that. I mean, DLP is a growing issue now. And DLP is all about, something's going to get in, and people are going to try to send data out. How do I stop it from happening? And it's literally because of this zero-day effect. I think people have just come to realize that they need to do all of the best practices. They need to protect themselves from, frankly, some of the amateurs and the low-hanging fruit. But the real serious guys, the guys that are in this for a living, are really good at it, and they're getting in.
I would go so far as to say the bad guys are winning.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to say. And we're doing our best and investing in new technologies to try to stay ahead. But it is, as was said earlier, it's kind of cat and mouse now. We're trying to come up with creative, proactive, behavioral, not static, old world pattern files. But over the past few years, it's
right. Well, which brings us the issue of the targeted attack, which we're seeing a lot of. Google is an example of that. Yeah. We've seen a lot of small businesses get targeted for their bank accounts. So how do you defend against the targeted attack, which often uses this sort of simple social engineering kind of, try to get into the CFO's computer with, it's a fake resume or something for a potential hire. I mean, how do you defend against these kind of things?
Scan the document. Scan virtually everything that's going in and out of your networks.
Turn email off.
Turn email off.
Turn web and email off.
No. Scan. Scan.
disconnect from the internet.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, if you believe in the power of the internet as your success and a vehicle for business, you better make darn well sure that you're scanning that pipe, what goes in and what goes out. And there's just no exception about it. You just have to do it.
Well, you really do. And I think the reaction time of the IT teams has to improve too. Once the first person reports that they see something unusual, because oftentimes someone will say, this seems a little strange to me that I'm getting this mail on this day. And they'll report it to the IT team, and then they'll investigate it, and they'll look at it, and then eventually they'll wrap that around to whatever cloud messaging security system that you have or your internal messaging security system. And by that time, it's already got to several thousand other people in the company. And they do tend to target the executives, either because they're the least smart or they're the richest.
We're
Okay,
the ones that are going
and so
out to the wrong places.
we're the ones who go to Facebook. Right? Me and Matt just friended each other on Facebook.
You know, we sell our products through a group of highly skilled security specialists, value-added resellers, and much to what Ken was saying, this grid network of not only our selling community, but also the fact that these devices are constantly communicating back and forth to SonicWALL. To what you just said, we have a network of people that are out there as sensors, and all of a sudden they're seeing something happen in their network, and they're providing that information immediately back to this grid of 1.5 million install-based solutions out there. And those levels of protections are happening much faster by the social medium of this grid than just that one person sitting there saying, oh, something just happened. I got to go figure out what the heck to do now, right?
So if we talk about it just for a minute, a different type of enterprise, right? So let's take a hospital. Hospital is an enterprise. And they've got IT information systems, they're protecting sensitive data, they've got a bunch of things that attach to the network, not PCs, but maybe they're monitoring devices. In that world, you've got a collision of culture between clinical engineering and IT. They're looking more like IT devices. There's FDA regulations that a patch is classed as a medical device. It has to be tested for 90 days before it can be delivered down to a machine. How do you deal with that?
Anybody see CNBC this morning at 3 o'clock? Yes, I was up. There was a discussion on CNBC talking about people that are successfully learning how to hack pacemakers. Right? I mean, you start to sit back
People
and say...
will be hacking automobiles.
Automobiles, right? So
Well,
we know we have a very strong... They did. I was going to say...
bricked 100 cars.
We have very strong evidence in the industry about one automotive manufacturer that has, if you will, a PC on board every vehicle, right? And their vehicles, the accelerators, I know this sounds... No, it's not a Japan company, but cars were told to stop at a certain time. Just stop. Right? Just stop. So again, this stuff, we really do have to find a better way. We have to, I'm going to keep on going back to the point, deep packet inspection, we've got to scan everything, right? We have to have a community that's willing to, quite frankly, talk more about the situations that are happening at hand so that we can build the preventions and the protections. This isn't going to happen by one company or, quite frankly, one customer. It's going to happen through the community that we all have today at really socializing the solution collectively.
Well, there will be no end to the number of devices hackers will find a way into. And Adrian and I were part of a later discussion on CNBC. We were part of a panel that they had that was discussing that very issue about the pacemaker in particular. But it's a pacemaker today. It's something else tomorrow. Every device, everything that provides you information or entertains you is going to be connected in some way to the net. And because of that, we have to start thinking now that every device, no matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's a pinball machine, is going to have some level of security built into it from the very beginning, or we're never going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube 10 years from now. We'll be trying to figure out how to, secure our refrigerators.
Yeah. Well, Adrian, getting to what you were saying about the government wishing they could start over with PCs, with these devices, in a sense, there is an opportunity to bake it in, isn't there?
Yeah, but if you have a look at what's happened in smart grid, just another type of enterprise, a utility, and actually every enterprise is dependent upon that sort of enterprise. There's a lot of confusion because the government, doing what they thought was right with this DOE stimulus funds, flowed a whole lot of money into an industry that wasn't really ready to consume it from a standards definition perspective. So you went from having industry standards groups that were going to define security standards for that environment or network topology to pulling back and saying, well, we'll define some guidelines. And if people implement it this way or that way, then it's entirely up to them, or almost entirely up to them.
Right.
So you would think But it's still not happening.
Well, now we're getting into an area where we're talking about critical infrastructure of the country and the security of the economy and so on. What is the role for government in sort of pushing industry to, in a certain direction when it comes to security, be it policy-wise or be it, the technologies that they procure and using their fat wallet to.
But see, that's the thing. That more than any legislation that they can ever pass, their money is the most powerful tool that they have to get the industry to do what they want it to do. They can buy products that are capable of doing what they think that the future is. For instance, IPv6. Until the U.S. government mandated that new computer systems on the U.S. government systems were going to have to use IPv6, hardly any carrier in this country was even considering deploying it on a national or even global scale. In fact, there was only one provider, which was NTT, that provided it globally. And so until the U.S. government started deploying IPv6, then all of a sudden we're talking billions of dollars. And it turns out they're a big customer. They're bigger than I am. Although it doesn't seem that way when I look at the checks I got to write. But the U.S. government can get whatever they want from technology by funding it. And funding it means buying the products that they want to behave the way that they think that they should behave. That is their single biggest tool. They will spend forever trying to pass some legislation which by the time everyone gets done with it will actually have accomplished nothing. And in the end, their dollars are what's really going to push the technology. They did it with IPv6 recently. They did it with DNSSEC recently. They've done it with a number of technologies.
Yeah, where are they pushing us now? What's their interest now?
Well, go ahead.
So this is more kind of on the advanced technology R&D side. But I mean, DARPA 2 weeks ago issued a request for proposals to develop a military-grade application store, secured application store for Android devices in the battlefield. So that's going to spur a lot of innovation around, what does that really look like, and with the hope that some of that transfers over to the commercial sector.
That's interesting. I think we can't leave tonight without talking about the cloud and software as a service and cloud computing. And so many companies want to take advantage of cloud services because of the cost benefits and the flexibility and the being able to pass on the patching to somebody else, to a Google or whoever else. So is it how much is it a security risk, or is it actually a security benefit for some companies, to turn it over to a tech company to take care of it for them?
Well, as we go out and talk to CIOs, I think that there's great optimism behind the cloud, the opportunity of what a cloud can bring, whether it be for optimization of IT, whether it is all about better end customer type of capabilities. But here is the concern. How secure is the cloud, right? And so what we see a lot of companies doing is actually prescribing to private clouds, right? And I think that that's probably going to be the first step in this evolution toward massive clouds. I think we have to learn how to walk before we run here real carefully around private clouds, making sure that we're doing the right thing, understanding how to manage that, understanding how the multiple interfaces of these devices in the clouds interoperate with each other, the ability to patch, control information flow, scan information flow, moving from one cloud to the next, all in a private environment before I clearly hand it over to somebody in a public environment. The last thing I think most CIOs that have studied this have said, I don't want my information in a public cloud where I know mine's secure, but how about the guy sitting right next to me in the very next server that's on the same grid, that's in the same interconnect pool, right? And that's where I hear the fear mostly from today's IT organization and leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, I do. But I will say this, that in many cases, for the vast majority of companies, the vast majority of them, their IT staff is less capable of securing that data in their enterprise than that cloud provider is who can pull high quality resources together to secure that. I think that some companies that are on the edge, they think that they have a high-quality staff that really knows what they're doing and can protect that data. But unless you're sure about that, talk to your cloud provider. Find out what do they do for security? How are they protecting that? All the concerns about cloud security are all valid concerns. They are. But I would argue that for many companies, they don't have the wherewithal to protect the data themselves to the degree that it's being protected in the cloud.
I mean, to add to that, I mean, there's 8 million businesses in the U.S. that have greater or less than 100 employees. And I mean, if they have one IT guy, I'd be impressed, let alone a security expert. So for that situation...
Well, the office managers also.
They're wearing lots of hats, trust me, sweeping up. So yeah, I think it makes sense to move more to the cloud, and the security capabilities there probably are better than they could do. But I agree completely with you, Matt, that enterprises are going to go private cloud and
Larger
Hold on for a second.
larger. Sorry.
Just Dan, so these 8,000, these 8 million small businesses that really have 100 or less employees, absolutely right, absolutely right. But most of the ones that we're finding that are really fighting this battle smartly are utilizing, quite frankly, a value-added reseller that specialty is around, quite frankly, security. They're looking at potentially not one, but thousands of customers. And they're managing that infrastructure. But again, they're not on a public cloud by the reseller. They're literally inside the company still today, right? I do believe that they'll get lifted. And there's some very smart managed services providers, resellers, that are creating a new business model that says, I'll manage that information. But interestingly enough, that information's managed on its own equipment.
Yeah.
Right? It's that commingling of equipment and, quite frankly, of opportunity. And I would even say some of them are getting very smart where they'll put email collectively together, but they're not going to keep ERP or CRM systems, customer information specifically, HR information specifically in a commingled database with other people.
To expand on that, though, I think there is this aspect that we talk about mobility, consumerization of IT, all the devices that are coming in. How many IT organizations can really keep up with Android, iPhone, Windows Mobile 7, Samsung, Bada coming in, right, on a global basis? So we've actually been partnering a lot of the carriers who are now expanding their service, not just the data service, also in terms of managed services for these mobile devices. One, because they have staff who actually understands these devices, they work with device manufacturers quite a bit. And two, because there's concentration of resources to do so, right? So that when something happens to a particular device type, they are the first ones to actually understand what the patch is going to be and provide that to them. And it's not just the small guys. It's actually large enterprises, global enterprises who want this service from them. And that's something that I think some of us who have to evaluate, is our IT organization capable of keeping up if consumerization of IT is what we believe is going to happen, right?
So there's two things. I mean, we've talked about storing data and managing data, but there's a whole other class of cloud or network services, which is what these guys do, which is infrastructure services or network services that underpin a lot of these other things. Tying identity to these devices so that they authenticate onto a network, using certificate infrastructure so I don't need to remember username and passwords and write them down on the post-it note on my screen. I mean, so the cloud, I think, brings with it a lot of potential to develop even new classes of infrastructure services that will be part of the security solution here.
Yeah, I think a lot of the cloud software as a service providers have completely understood what Matt was saying and have offered their same service with the same ease of use and the same multi-tenancy to you as an on-prem solution so that you can take advantage of that. I'll tell you, one of the things that's driving people to the cloud is not just the cost. It's the usability of it.
Flexibility.
In so many cases, these guys have so many customers that they're learning so much and making the product just that much better and so much easier to use that people are moving to it, even if it were cost neutral to do so. They're just saying that's just so much easier to use. Can I get that on-prem, and I just want to run that on-prem?
And develop applications much quicker.
And if you're running an online service, from day one it has potential to be global. And there's all kinds of regional geographical regulations around what can and can't be done with data. That's expensive for a business to grapple with on their own.
I think there's no disagreement. The cloud is going to happen, but I think it's going to happen in stages, and larger enterprises are going to just be doing more of a private cloud model.
Right.
And the technology underpinning of that is really virtualization. And we haven't talked about that, but I don't want to complicate it, but virtualization brings a host of security challenges too. Because conventional,
Just complicated.
conventional
For
security.
many of the same reasons.
Yeah.
Where is that server, by the way? But I will tell you one thing, IT professionals have no choice but to look at virtualization for a variety of reasons. When your competitors or even your peers are, becoming phenomenally more productive by being able to move data centers literally from one location to another, and it's sophisticated enough now where you can move storage with it and firewall rules with it and all of those things. I'll tell you, if you haven't seen it, there's a video that's on CNET about Microsoft's new data center in Chicago, and it's incredible that they just pull in with truckloads, thousands of servers, and just plug in some water and plug in some electricity, and they can bring them on, and that's all possible because of virtualization. When they can build 2,000 servers in an afternoon. You could never do that without virtualization. It's just not possible. So I agree with you that there are some security concerns, and I say now is the time to address those concerns, and let's get on it right now, because that train has already left the station. And if you're an IT professional and you're not considering or at least doing some level of virtualization, even if it's at the development level, then I think you may have missed the boat, or maybe missing the boat.
And doesn't the cloud have some advantages in terms of, I met with Google earlier this week, and they were talking about the advantage of when you're pulling the data from the cloud, you're not leaving it necessarily on, you don't leave